Michael Hayes had lived in the same small town outside Dallas his entire life. He was known by many as the kind of man who never turned away a neighbor in need, even when his own circumstances weren't easy. At 34, his life was defined by the grease-stained overalls he wore each day, the sound of old engines echoing through his modest garage, and the quiet determination in his eyes. His business wasn't thriving, customers came and went, but money was always short. Still, Michael never let hardship harden him. He believed that if he kept working, life would eventually reward his persistence. The garage itself stood as a symbol of his struggles and his dreams. The roof leaked during heavy rains, and the faded sign above the door read, "Hayes Auto Repair," letters peeling from years of neglect. The tools he used were second-hand, many, bought at auctions or given by friends who had no use for them anymore. Yet Michael took pride in every repair he completed, whether it was fixing an old truck for a farmer or patching up a neighbor's rusty sedan. His payment was often more gratitude than cash, but to him, that was enough to keep going. That particular summer evening, the sky was painted with streaks of orange and purple as the sun dipped toward the horizon. Michael sat outside the garage, wiping his hands on an old rag, staring at the quiet road. Business had been slow all week, and the weight of unpaid bills pressed heavily on his shoulders. Still, he tried to smile, convincing himself that tomorrow would be better. He had made a habit of not letting despair show on his face, even when it gnawed at him from the inside. The silence of the evening was broken by the sudden roar of a motorcycle engine. The sound grew louder until, with a sharp screech, a powerful black bike pulled up in front of his garage. Michael sat up straighter, curious. The rider was a woman, dressed in black leather gear from head to toe. Her helmet covered her face, giving her an air of mystery. She swung her leg off the bike and spoke with a hint of frustration. "Something's wrong. It just stopped working properly," she said, her voice muffled through the helmet. Michael immediately rose to his feet, setting aside his rag. "Let's take a look," he offered warmly. There was no hesitation in his tone. It didn't matter to him whether the rider was a stranger or someone he knew. He pushed the heavy motorcycle into his garage, examining it with the same care he would give to any machine. His hands worked instinctively, checking the chain, the fuel lines, and the engine. The rider stood nearby, watching him silently, her helmet still firmly in place. As Michael worked, he tried to make conversation. "Where are you headed?" he asked casually, tightening a loose bolt. The woman hesitated before replying. "Just traveling, passing through," she said, keeping her answers short. Michael didn't press her further, sensing she wasn't ready to share more. Instead, he focused on the machine, treating it with respect. For him, every repair was more than just mechanical, it was an act of trust. The person who brought in the vehicle trusted him to restore something broken. What Michael didn't know was that this encounter was anything but ordinary. Beneath the helmet and leather jacket was Emily Anderson, a woman who lived in a world far removed from small-town garages. At 29, she was the only daughter of a billionaire, heir to one of the largest corporations in the United States. But wealth had never given her happiness. Surrounded by luxury, fame, and people who admired her only for her fortune, Emily often felt like she lived in a golden prison. For months, she had been traveling the country on her motorcycle, hiding her identity, searching for something authentic. Emily had grown tired of men who only saw her as a path to money and influence. She wanted someone who cared for her as a person, not for the empire her family name carried. That search had brought her here, to this small Texas town, where fate had led her to Michael Hayes. As she watched him quietly work, she noticed how focused he was, how his brow furrowed with concentration. There was no arrogance in his movements, only dedication and honesty. It was something she hadn't seen in a long time. Michael eventually stepped back and wiped his forehead. "Looks like your bike's chain slipped out of alignment. Nothing too serious," he explained. His voice was calm, reassuring, the kind of tone that instantly put people at ease. Emily tilted her head slightly, intrigued by how he treated the situation. He didn't act as if she owed him the world for his help, nor did he take advantage of the fact that she was stranded. He was simply doing his job, without pretension or greed. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice softer this time. Michael nodded, brushing off her gratitude with a small smile. "That's what I'm here for." He adjusted the last part, tested the bike, and soon the engine roared back to life. The sound filled the garage, echoing like a small victory. Emily couldn't help but smile under her helmet. In that moment, she felt something stir inside her, a flicker of admiration for this man who asked for nothing but gave his best regardless. When it came time to settle the repair, Michael surprised her. "It's on the house," he said, waving off her attempt to pay. Emily frowned beneath the helmet. "But you fixed it." "I should." Michael interrupted gently. "You looked like you needed help. That's enough payment for me." His words were simple, but to Emily they struck deeper than any compliment or grand gesture she had ever received. For once, here was someone who didn't measure value in dollars but in kindness. Emily lingered for a moment, reluctant to leave. She wanted to know more about this mechanic who lived so differently from the people in her world. "Do you always help strangers like this?" she asked softly. Michael chuckled, his voice carrying a hint of humility. "If I can. Machines break. People get stuck. If I can make someone's day a little easier, why not?" His words carried no hidden agenda, no need to impress. To Emily, they felt refreshingly genuine. As the evening air grew cooler, Emily finally mounted her motorcycle again. She looked at Michael through the tinted visor of her helmet, her heart unexpectedly heavy at the thought of leaving. "Maybe I'll come back," she said casually, hiding the sincerity behind her tone. Michael nodded with a small smile, his hands tucked into his grease-stained pockets. "You know where to find me," he replied. And just like that, the mysterious biker rode off into the fading light, leaving Michael unaware that this brief encounter was about to change his life forever. For Emily, the ride through the Texas roads felt different now. She had met many people during her travels, but none had touched her the way Michael did in that short span of time. It wasn't about how skillfully he fixed her bike. It was about the way he treated her with respect, with kindness, and with no expectation in return. Beneath her disguise, she smiled to herself. Perhaps, just perhaps, her search for something real had finally led her in the right direction. The night after their first encounter, Emily found herself replaying Michael's words in her mind. She had traveled to dozens of towns, met countless people, but there was something undeniably different about him. He hadn't treated her with suspicion, nor had he looked at her as though she carried some hidden treasure. To him, she was just a traveler in need of help, and he was simply a man doing what he could. That simplicity, that humility, tugged at her heart more than any luxurious gesture she had experienced in her life of privilege. Michael, on the other hand, went about his evening as usual, unaware of the weight of his actions. To him, helping the biker woman was no different than fixing a truck for an elderly farmer or patching up a local kid's bicycle for free. He ate a simple dinner at his kitchen table, stared at the unpaid bills stacked nearby, and sighed. The itchy money he didn't charge for that repair could have covered at least a meal or two, but his conscience never allowed him to take advantage of someone stranded. Kindness, he believed, was worth more than cash. The following afternoon, Emily returned. Her motorcycle was in perfect condition, but she told herself she could make up a problem just to see him again. She rolled the bike into the garage, pretending the brakes felt a little off. Michael greeted her with a friendly smile, wiping his hands on a rag as he bent down to check. He didn't question her story, though he quickly noticed there was nothing wrong. Instead, he chose to focus on making her comfortable. "Why don't you sit inside? It's hot," he offered. His hospitality was as natural as breathing. Emily accepted, perching on a worn-out chair near his workbench. The garage was cluttered with tools, old parts, and framed photographs of Michael with his late father, who had taught him the trade. Emily studied the space, feeling oddly at home despite the grease and dust. Michael glanced at her now and then, wondering why she seemed so restless. "So, where are you from?" he asked gently. Emily hesitated, careful not to reveal her true identity. "Here and there. Traveling, I guess." He smiled knowingly, sensing there was more she wasn't saying, but he never pressed her for answers. Over the next few days, Emily made excuses to return. Sometimes it was the sound of her engine, other times she pretended her chain was loose again. Each time, Michael welcomed her without judgment. Their conversations began to stretch longer about life, about dreams, about values. Michael spoke openly about wanting to expand his little garage one day, maybe hire a couple of workers and build something sustainable for the community. "Not for money," he explained, "but because I think this town deserves a good, honest place to bring their cars." Emily listened intently, touched by the sincerity in his words. What struck her most was how little he cared about appearances. He never asked about her background, her wealth, or where she came from. Instead, he asked about what she liked, what made her happy, what places she wanted to see. For the first time in her life, Emily felt like someone was looking directly into her soul instead of staring at the name and fortune that shadowed her. She found herself laughing more in that greasy garage than she ever had in penthouse parties or glamorous events back in New York City. One evening, Michael noticed she looked tired. Her shoulders slumped as though she carried a hidden burden, and her eyes seemed to carry secrets. Without hesitation, he reached into his small kitchen next to the garage and returned with a plate of simple food beans, cornbread, and some leftover chicken. "Here, you look like you could use a meal," he said kindly. Emily was stunned. She was used to chefs preparing feasts worth hundreds of dollars, but this plate, offered with such genuine care, tasted better than any gourmet dish. She ate slowly, her eyes stinging with unexpected tears. That night, Emily lay awake in her modest motel room, staring at the ceiling. Why did she feel so safe around him? Why did his words linger in her mind long after she left? She thought about how he had refused her money, how he shared his food, and how he looked at her as if she were just a person, not a billionaire's daughter hiding behind a disguise. It scared her, but it also thrilled her. For years, she had craved this kind of connection, and now she wondered if she had finally found it. Michael, too, felt a quiet curiosity stirring inside him. The biker woman intrigued him, though he tried not to overthink it. He reminded himself she was just passing through, that her visits were likely temporary. Still, he couldn't deny how her laughter brightened the dim atmosphere of his garage, or how her questions about his life made him feel seen. He had grown used to being invisible, just another working man in a small town, but around her he felt valued. Something about her presence lifted the weight of his struggles, if only for a little while. Days turned into weeks, and Emily's visits became routine. Sometimes she brought coffee for Michael, other times she sat on the old chair, chatting while he worked on other cars. Their friendship deepened naturally, free of pretense or expectation. One afternoon, as they shared stories, under the fading light, Emily caught herself staring at him longer than usual. His rugged face smudged with grease, and his tired yet kind eyes seemed more real, more genuine than any polished man she had ever met. She looked away quickly, but the warmth in her chest told her that something deeper was growing inside. Michael noticed the way she lingered around him, but he didn't dare assume anything. He wasn't the type of man who expected romance, especially not from someone who seemed as free-spirited and mysterious as her. Yet, when she smiled at him, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, a spark of hope. Life had beaten him down in many ways, but her presence reminded him that perhaps not all was lost. Still, he kept his feelings guarded, not wanting to burden her with the weight of his own hardships. Emily, however, couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She began to crave their conversations. The way Michael's voice calmed her storms, the way he looked at life with quiet resilience, despite having so little. She found excuses to stay longer each time, asking about his dreams, his childhood, and the moments that shaped him. Michael answered honestly, never sugarcoating his struggles, yet always highlighting the importance of doing what was right. "Life isn't about riches," he once told her, his voice steady. "It's about being able to look in the mirror and know you did the right thing." Those words stayed with her long after she left the garage that day. Emily had grown up in a world where mirrors reflected diamonds, wealth and power, but never truth. For once, she saw herself through Michael's eyes, not as an heiress bound by expectations, but as a woman capable of being loved for who she truly was. It frightened her to think what might happen if he discovered her real identity, but it also gave her hope that perhaps he would see beyond it. And slowly, almost without realizing it, friendship began to turn into something far more fragile and precious. By the end of summer, their bond had become undeniable. Emily's visits were no longer about the motorcycle. They were about laughter shared in the soft hum of the garage, quiet moments of understanding, and the unspoken warmth that passed between them. Neither of them admitted it yet, but their hearts had already begun to recognize what their words did not dare to say. Beneath the grease, the disguise, and the secrets, something beautiful was unfolding, something that neither wealth nor hardship could ever buy. The evening was quiet in Dallas when Emily made her decision. Weeks of hiding behind her disguise had weighed heavily on her, and though she cherished the moments she shared with Michael, she knew the truth could no longer remain a secret. If she wanted their bond to mean anything, she had to show him who she really was. That night, she stood before her mirror, traded her worn biker jacket for an elegant dress, and allowed the heiress in her to finally step forward. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of her wealth, but of losing him. Michael was closing up the garage when he saw the headlights of a sleek luxury car pulling up outside. It wasn't unusual to see expensive vehicles, but something about this one made him pause. When the driver's door opened and Emily stepped out, his breath caught. She looked completely different, polished, radiant, unmistakably from a world far above his own. Confusion rippled through him as he wiped his hands on his rag, his eyes narrowing. "Emily!" he whispered, though he wasn't even sure if it was the same woman he had come to know. Her smile was both nervous and tender as she approached him. "It's me, Michael," she said softly. "I have something I need to tell you." He stared at her, stunned, as she began to explain everything: her real name, her background, her family's fortune, and why she had been traveling in disguise. She confessed how she had grown tired of being seen only as a billionaire's daughter, how she longed for something real. And with each word, Michael's chest tightened with disbelief. He had treated her like an ordinary woman, never knowing the truth. For a long moment he couldn't speak. His mind wrestled with the image of the grease-smudged biker girl who laughed in his garage and the elegant heiress standing before him now. It was as though two worlds had collided inside his tiny workshop, and he wasn't sure where he fit in anymore. His hands trembled slightly as he finally managed to ask, "So all this time, you've been testing me?" His voice cracked with a mix of hurt and awe. Emily shook her head quickly, her eyes brimming with tears. "Not testing, searching, hoping." Michael turned away, pacing in silence. He thought about the nights they shared stories, the meals he had offered her, the way he had opened his heart without expectation. Now, the reality of her identity pressed down on him like a weight. What did he have to offer someone like her? A rundown garage, a pile of unpaid bills? Yet when he glanced back at her, standing there vulnerably, not flaunting her wealth but pleading for his understanding, his anger softened. He could see in her eyes that everything they shared had been real. Finally, Emily stepped closer and touched his hand. "Michael, I chose you because you saw me, not the fortune, not the name, just me. Do you know how rare that is?" Her voice quivered with sincerity. He swallowed hard, his throat tight. For years he had believed he was invisible, insignificant in a world that rewarded greed. Yet this woman, whose life was filled with privilege, had found worth in his simple kindness. His eyes burned as tears threatened to fall, and he whispered, "I don't know what to say." She squeezed his hand gently. "Say you believe me." In that fragile moment, Michael finally let himself feel what he had been holding back. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as though afraid she might vanish. The scent of her perfume mingled with the familiar grease and oil of his garage, blending two worlds that had always seemed impossible to unite. "I believe you," he said at last, his voice breaking. Emily's tears spilled freely as she clung to him, relief washing over her. For the first time in years, she wasn't Emily the heiress, she was simply Emily, loved for who she was. The days that followed brought changes Michael never could have imagined. Emily, determined to prove her devotion, invested in his dream. With her resources, his small, struggling garage transformed into one of the finest repair shops in Texas. New tools, clean facilities, and skilled workers soon filled the space that had once been held together by sheer grit and determination. Yet through it all, Michael refused to let wealth change him. He continued treating customers with honesty, refusing to overcharge, and reminding his workers that kindness was the heart of their business. Emily admired him even more for it. She could have bought him anything, given him a mansion or whisked him away to luxury, but he chose to stay grounded. That humility, that refusal to let money dictate his worth, was exactly what had drawn her to him in the first place. And so, she didn't fight it. Instead, she stood proudly by his side, watching as he became not just a respected mechanic, but an inspiration in the community. People admired how the once struggling man now thrived, never losing his humanity in the process. Their love blossomed quietly, without grand gestures or public displays. They shared simple dinners, late-night talks, and laughter that echoed through their new workshop. Emily often teased him about his stubborn pride, while Michael teased her about her terrible excuses to visit his garage. And though their backgrounds were worlds apart, their hearts beat in unison. Michael no longer felt invisible, and Emily no longer felt trapped by her wealth. Together, they discovered a life built not on riches or poverty, but on something far stronger: sincerity, trust, and love. As time passed, Emily introduced him to her world, carefully and gradually. He attended dinners with her family, awkward in his worn suit, but always speaking with the same quiet integrity that had captured her heart. At first, her relatives doubted him, questioning why she would choose a mechanic when she could have anyone. But Emily defended him fiercely, reminding them that love was not about social status, but about truth. And slowly, even the skeptics saw the way Michael's honesty and loyalty brought a glow to her that no riches ever had. One evening, months after her big reveal, Michael and Emily sat on the hood of her car under a sky filled with stars. Michael glanced at her and asked softly, "Do you ever regret telling me? What if I had walked away?" Emily leaned closer, resting her head on his shoulder. "If you had walked away, then at least I would have known. But I never wanted to hide from you, Michael. You taught me something no money could buy, that love isn't about what someone owns. It's about who they are, and who you are is everything I've been searching for." Her words filled him with a warmth he hadn't felt in years. All his struggles, his doubts, and his insecurities seemed to fade in the face of her unwavering faith in him. He kissed her gently, sealing a bond that had been forged not by wealth or convenience, but by sincerity. In that moment, both knew they had found what countless people spend lifetimes searching for: true love. Emily had set out disguised as a biker to escape her gilded cage, and she had discovered freedom, not in solitude, but in the arms of a humble mechanic who valued her soul. Years later, their story became a quiet legend in the small town outside Dallas. People often whispered about the billionaire heiress who fell in love with a mechanic, but to Michael and Emily, the world's opinions didn't matter. Their workshop thrived not because of money, but because of trust and kindness. Their home was filled with laughter, love, and the kind of peace that wealth could never guarantee. And whenever someone asked Emily why she chose Michael, she would simply smile and reply, "Because when I was nothing more than a stranger in need, he treated me like I was everything."